You're listening to Aging Uncensored.
Welcome to Aging Uncensored, the podcast where we fearlessly navigate the highs and lows of aging and caring for older adults. I'm your host, Christy Baines, with my co-host, Nicole Crawford. Welcome back to our podcast. We're excited that you are liking, subscribing, following along.
Sharing with your friends.
I think right now we might be up to about, 10, 12, maybe. I don't know.
Does that include your mom?
I don't know. I don't know that she's liked yet. I'm going to have to teach her how to like. If she does, I'll get 11, right?
My brother said he was very proud of me.
I love it. Hey, Ronan, I think your son was
he was our first subscriber.
Our first subscriber.
Yay.
So follow along. Hopefully we'll reach 50, 100. I don't know. Let's keep going.
Woohoo.
We got to be interesting now.
That's right. Gotta step it up.
That's right. So thanks for following along the last few episodes where we dove into alphabet soup, all the acronyms and terms and
some of the acronyms.
We really only skimmed the surface, to be honest with you. And one thing we did need to note, obviously we're primarily in the state of Alabama, and we said that in Alabama, independent living facilities are not regulated,
but they are in other states.
Yes. So anything outside of the nursing home level, home health, and hospice, which those are all regulated on a national basis because they receive reimbursement from Medicare and Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is going to be state specific,
yes.
Right? So anyway, we won't dive into that because that might bore you for a little while, but we did want that disclaimer. So, okay. We're going to jump into a subject that we will talk a lot about. And honestly, right now, we're on the journey for our team, Life Care Solutions, to become Alabama's leading
guide
dementia care expert.
Oh,
I love how you're like, guide. Okay, now let me quiz you since we said guide.
We were just talking about Medicaid and CMS and
I know all the things.
All the stuff.
I threw you a curveball. What is guide?
Guide is guiding an improved dementia experience. Actually, I was listening to a different podcast on aging this weekend, and the ladies that were on that were some of the people that did the research that caused CMS to want to pay for people to care for their loved ones at home. It's really neat.
Yeah, we're
it's
really
coming
excited.
full circle.
Yes, and so actually, one of the gentlemen that we talked about the first podcast was Alan Stevens and the REACH program, which was Resources for Enhancing Alzheimer's Caregivers' Health. And that's what led me to love the dementia journey and caring for persons living with dementia and their family members and so forth. Not that I love a dementia journey, but you know what I mean. And then that's, like you were saying, the podcast that you heard, that's where all of this research over the last 25 years,
30 plus years
has finally moved the needle, and nationally they're getting attention that if we can keep people at home, cared for at home, and we care for the people that are caring for the person with dementia, we can do things like reduce hospitalizations, reduce nursing home stays, improve quality of life, improve the quality and maybe even quantity of life for the family caregiver and the family unit. So it's exciting.
It is exciting.
So follow along over the next several months as we introduce team members that are going to be joining us, kind of the adventure of what this looks like to be the state's leading dementia care program. We're excited.
I'm glad you got that answer right.
Yes, right. And a little bit more about Guide. And we, over time, we'll put up fact sheets and things like that CMS has put out, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. One of the things is, where am I going with this one? I think I just lost my train of thought for a second. CMS, Guide.
Follow along.
I don't know where I went with that. Can we pause that one? Okay. Oh, look, it was our first mishap.
Oh, yay.
We haven't done that this whole time.
Because we're so perfect.
That's right. We've been really good with no ums and no likes.
I had a lot of ums in the last one, I think.
I don't think you did.
Okay, good.
I don't think you did. Anyway, we're excited about this new journey, but this leads us to what we're going to talk about today, which is really just assessments and screening tools that physicians, practitioners, nurses, physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, all the different people will use, what we use to assess someone's cognitive ability and how we use that to determine kind of where they are in their journey of living with dementia. Right?
Yes.
One thing that obviously we're going to always bring to everybody's attention because we really feel strongly about it is Teepa Snow's. Y'all, we've talked about Teepa Snow, and we'll put up her website and things like that in the bio. But she uses the gem state model, and one thing that she's just put out over the last couple of months has been, where's the beginning of this? The gem state toolkit. And what I really like about it is inside of here, it talks about a dementia scale comparison. So it has the different jewels, but then it tells you based on which scale is used, kind of how to see where a sapphire would fall or a pearl or a ruby or what have you. Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. So we're going to just dive on in.
Wait, first, what is your favorite dementia story or one of them?
Gosh, I've got a few. We're going to go back and forth on these. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm going to hit first with a personal one.
Okay.
I was early on and I was a administrator for memory care. So I have two stories that come out of that. One is my grandmother, my Mama Elsie. She was my mom's mom. Wonderful lady, lived an incredible life, and 89 of her 91 years were amazing. She outlived 2 husbands.
Wow.
She raised 2 great kids. She was super involved in her community and her faith. She was really a neat lady, but the last couple of years of her life, we could see, her struggles with cognitive ability and dementia and so forth. And my mom was working full time at the time, and Mama would go back and forth into the hospitals, and she was in this small hospital in a small town in Alabama. And I'd gone down to see Mom that day, and Mom had been with Mama Elsie for several days, by her side, and the stepdaughters had come in and out, and they, my grandmother lit up when they were there, and it was nice. But then when they would leave, she would kind of put it back on my mom, and anyway, it was time for Mom to leave, and Mom really needed to get back to work and things like that. And she was like, Mama, I've got to go home. I'm going to go home this afternoon, and I'll be back to see you. But I just want to let you know I'm going to go home. And she was like, well, I don't have any love left for you. And my mom was crushed.
Aww.
And I'm like, Mom, that, they're going to take out their emotions and their frustrations on the person they love the most, and so
a safe space.
A safe space. That's right. I was like, that just means that she loves you the most. And then Mom goes, well, I've got to go home because at the time my mom just loved to collect stray cats. Actually she didn't, but I'm going to just make that part of the story. But she told my grandmother, I've got to go home and feed the cats. So my grandmother looked at her and meow. Well, I'm a cat too. And my mom's like, what do I do with this story?
Pet her.
Right.
Pet her pretty face.
Right.
And then shove her in a closet.
That's right. And this is kind of right after, I had gone to visit. And again, I'm in my early 20s. I shouldn't have strange facial hairs and things like that. And I go and I'm hugging on her, and she looks at me from the hospital bed and she goes, wow, you've got some whiskers. And I'm like, oh my God, wow. This beautiful Southern lady that would have never made these things, comments, just said she was a cat, told my mom she had no love left for her. And now
Commenting on your chin hairs.
Commenting on my chin hairs. That's right. So it was a great opportunity to talk to Mom about, hey, and by the way, my mom did not take in stray cats, but she did have an excuse to go home and, try to tend to her own business. But it was an opportunity to say, Mom, this is what happens when someone has brain changes. 30 years ago, we really weren't saying brain changes. We were just saying living with dementia.
Mm-hmm.
And that they're going to project their frustrations on the people that they have such a safe space with, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I guess my next favorite story is when I was an administrator around the same time. And we're going to call her Miss Billy. Miss Billy was from a small town.
I knew you were going to tell this story.
Yes, I love Miss Billy's story. So she was from a small town. And, when someone's moving into a community, one of the things we should ask is, what's their routine? Again, going back to Mama Elsie, she didn't take showers. She took baths. Mm-hmm. She always took a bath, and she got her hair, washed and set once a week, right? Well, that was kind of the same for Miss Billy. Miss Billy took baths, and she got her hair washed and set in the small little, beauty shop in her small town. And so when it came time to move to a memory care community, Miss Billy was not interested in undressing in front of a strange woman and getting into a closet with water pounding on you. That was just very strange. So Miss Billy could have been termed, or she could have been labeled, as resistant to care. She refused baths, refused a shower. Well, luckily in this memory care community, we had a spa room that had a walk-in spa tub, and my sister-in-law at the time, she owned a spa, and I said, hey, send me any of your bath fizzers and, things that maybe are testers that you don't use or whatever. And so once a week, maybe twice a week, we would have a hat with a bunch of names in it, but all the names were Billy. And we would draw the name out of the hat, and Miss Billy would win Spa Day.
Yay!
So Miss Billy, we got to have a great bath, and we brought her sparkling grape juice in a champagne glass. And she thought she was just, in some really lavish place. Until about, a couple of months in, one day she finally looked at me and she goes, why am I the only one that wins Spa Day? I'm like, you're lucky. Lucky, Miss Billy. Okay, so those are two of my stories. I'd love to hear your story.
Well, let's talk about this other stuff first, and then I'll tell you mine.
Okay, I like it. Let's jump on in.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we go back from the very beginning, when we really started in this field, what was the first test that you really got to know or understand when we were asked to go assess someone's level of cognitive ability?
Mini-mental.
The mini-mental, or you would hear people call it the MZ.
MMSE.
Yeah. I would call the MMSE or the mini-mental. Mm-hmm. The one time I heard it, MZ, I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Why are we calling it that? But anyway, the mini-mental status exam, right? So that was kind of the basic one that everybody used. And anything to add on the mini-mental? I mean, we can always show a screen during the podcast. It's the one that probably tricks people up the most when you ask them to start with 100 and count back by 7.
Or spell world backwards.
Spell world backwards, that's right. One funny story about the mini-mental, I had this incredible gentleman, you would have remembered him. He was brilliant, scientist, PhD, and he lived in a community, and a lot of people kind of wrote him off because his short-term memory was terrible. But I knew when I did the mini-mental and I asked for him, starting with 100, count back by 7, he would go all the way to 2.
Wow.
And if you've done it, you stop at 2. Well, honestly, you really stop at after 86 or something like that. But he stopped at 2. He went all the way. And so working with staff, it's almost kind of, I would go, hey, look what Mr. Jones can do. And he would do it. And they were like, whoa, how cool is that? So sometimes you use these exams and you're looking at the things they can't do anymore.
The deficits.
Right.
Yeah.
But what we like to do with it is to also see what they still can do. So when we're working with family members, we can go, okay, well, here are the deficits, and this, what you're looking at, yes, she actually is more progressed in these areas of things that she can't do. However, she could tell me the details about the story, or she was good with numbers. And so you kind of work on those things when you're building a plan of care for them. So then moving on to mini-mental, the next one that people use a lot is called the slums. What does that stand for?
St. Louis University mental exam, I think.
Mental status exam.
Yeah,
the slums. And inside the slums is the clock test. The dreaded clock test.
And it's part of the fast, like a quick cog screen.
Yeah, what they call the mini cog.
Yeah.
You'll hear a mini cog. There's a lot of different terms. We may not even get to all the ones that are used.
Probably not.
But the mini-mental and the slums.
Here's the blank clock
The
drawing.
blank clock test. That's
Yes.
right. And we'll go over what you do with that one. But you'll hear mini-mental, slums, and then the MoCA, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Screen. Those are the ones that are out of 30 points.
Right.
So 30 out of 30 means that you're got
perfect.
everything right. You got everything perfect. And we won't even kind of jump into some of the dementias that you might score really, really well on. Like you could score 27, 28 out of 30. Then you go to someone's home and you realize that they're not functioning very well at all. So although those tests are good baselines, you really have to kind of look at the whole picture. But this is really where you start, are these tests. So people will say, okay, my mom scored a 15 out of 30. What does that tell you? Like if we're on a slums, the mini-mental, MoCA, any of those, mom scored a 15 out of 30.
They're in a more moderate dementia state where you can definitely tell that there's not only IADL stuff that they need help with, but there's also activities of daily living that you may have to go in and help with. And this is generally where a lot of people start seeking outside help.
Right. And we may even see it sometimes that they're in the low 20s, right? So my dad, with a number of things that he had vascular dementia. And throughout his journey with brain changes, because his was more vascular related, he kind of stayed where he, once he kind of hit that deficit, and he stayed around somewhere between 22 to 19, depending on how he was doing at the time. But he hated the clock test. He's like, do I have to do that thing? I'm like, Dad, just think about a clock. You got this. Just think about a clock. But we'll show some examples. I mean, I know as we've been doing them, some of the ones that have really hit home when I've been with somebody is just a tick mark. They literally, on that piece of paper, just write a tick.
Instead of the numbers, yes.
And it may not even be ticks around the whole clock. It could just be 2 ticks. So if I'm doing the clock test on you, sometimes some people that do it actually give them points for drawing the circle.
And how they draw it, like putting in the 12, the 6, the 3, and the 9 first, and then filling in the other numbers.
Right. And this is even like starting with just drawing the circle. We like to go ahead and just have the circle ready for them. And then the first thing we ask is, put the hour markers, write the hour markers on the clock as they normally appear. And that's where, a lot of times people will do the anchors, or the one that we see a lot, and we know there's a visuospatial deficit, is when they start 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then they get to like, I don't know, where number 4, number 5 is.
They've got 11.
Yes. Or they start over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're like, oh, okay, great. Good job. Very good job. A couple of other ones that you're going to see used a lot. And matter of fact, when we start working on the guide model, and I remember what I was going to say earlier.
All right, say it.
Okay, so there are only 400 participants nationwide that got approved for the guide model.
And you're one of them.
No, we are one of 3 in the state of Alabama.
That's amazing.
So we're real excited about that. Anyway, more to come for that. We'll be able to start that program July of next year in 2025. That's what I remembered. I knew it was going to come back to me at some point.
Yeah.
Just like, once you start telling stories, and that's one thing working with folks with brain changes, once you start telling stories, sometimes those things are going to start coming up again, right? So even though we do these tests, we learn more about the person that we're working with based on
conversation
and what we see around them. Give me a time before we jump into more of these tests. Give me a time when maybe somebody's screen kind of showed one thing, but as you started working with them, you realized there was a lot more in there. Oh, I threw a curveball.
Oh, you did. I have to think about it for a minute. So we have a client right now that lives at home alone, and she scored pretty high on hers, but the only medicine that she remembered to take was her Ativan at night.
Ooh. We don't like Ativan on seniors, do we?
No, but that was her sleeping medicine, and she knew she needed that. She would still put her clothes on backwards. She couldn't tell you what day it was. She would think that the neighbor's husband passed away 2 weeks ago, and it was like 6 months ago. But she scores pretty high. And what happens is that people are so intelligent, they can pull up that information, but they're executive functioning. They're looking at a situation and figuring out what to do and executing it. There's a lot of steps. Even though I just gave you 3, you could probably throw 15 different things in there that the brain has to think about and execute. So that's where the deficit is. You can score really high,
right?
Especially if you're really smart, but then you can't function at home by yourself.
And I think that's where, and this is going to be a new tool for us, but I know it's been used for a long time. And matter of fact, it's going to be one that Guide requires us to do is FAST. And the more that I dive into the FAST model, which is the functional assessment staging tool, I'm not going to remember that.
Yeah.
But when I look at that, when I compare it to, and again, we are not the neurologists and the researchers and so forth, and they may say something different. Matter of fact, when we have Dr. Powers or Dr. Geldmacher on, they're going to be like, well, you probably didn't say that correctly, but that's okay. When I look at it, and we look at the mini-mental and the slums and things like that, but we look at this scale that's new to us. It's not new to, to the market, the functional assessment staging tool. What I think is interesting is it's looking more at the ADLs and IADLs.
Right.
And if anybody remembers from Alphabet Soup, that's instrumental activities of daily living,
and activities
of daily living. So instead of doing more of the testing, like what day of the week is it? Can you count? Can you spell world backwards? How many types of animals can you, say in a minute? Can you draw a clock? It's looking more at, can they travel to new locations? Can they complete a task like bill paying, cooking, cleaning? Do they have difficulty? So just what you were saying, do they have difficulty putting on clothes without assistance? So she might have scored well on the test because if I remember correctly, this client's a nurse practitioner, very, very smart. However, something like putting on clothes correctly, which you learn how to do that before you go to kindergarten.
Right.
So this tells me that you've got to look at all of these things. And I think that's why it's going to be pretty cool for us to start using this tool because it just talks about the basic functions of being able to do things when you wake up in the morning.
But you can't ask the person that you're assessing, do you require assistance in choosing proper clothing?
No.
It's really going to be the people around them that are going to have to report on this.
Right. Exactly. So you still have to do a combination of both of them, I believe, so that we can see where we are. And again, I don't know a ton about the FAST scale, but we're learning on Tipa's scale. She does show where a lot of typically when we start working with clients, they might be between a 3 and a 4, but they're usually going to be somewhere between the 4, 5, and 6, like the emerald, amber, ruby.
Right.
And people can live
when people start seeking outside help.
That's right. That's right. And, somebody will say, well, she was just diagnosed a year ago. When I hear somebody was just diagnosed with dementia a year ago, I usually say, what did you see a few years before that? What are some other symptoms that you might have seen 5 years ago? Because typically by the time somebody's getting a diagnosis, we're well into the journey of the brain changes.
Right.
So a couple of the other models that assessment tools that are out there. We've talked about the Mini-Mental that's been on the market forever, the slums, the MoCA. A lot of practitioners in the Birmingham area will use the MoCA, particularly at...
I like the MoCA.
I do too. And you have to have, you have to be certified through the organization. And so those are some things that we've been looking into. Talked about the clock test. We talked about FAST. There's also there's 2 different actual assessments that are called the GDS. One, when we're talking about dementia, is the Global Deterioration Scale. Do you know much about that one?
No. I know the other GDS really well.
So the other GDS is?
The Geriatric Depression Screen, which if you have dementia, really just tells me what your basic personality was like before you got dementia.
That's right. Exactly. And you can use anything from a 15-point geriatric depression scale, which I feel like is
more than enough.
Yes. If you go into 30, I mean, one, it's very
You're just
tiring.
beating that
You're
poor
just
guy
beating
up.
up that person. Sometimes some of the questions I'm like, ooh, I don't even know if I really want to ask this question.
Do you want to die right here and now?
Right.
Do you find a reason to crawl out of bed in the morning?
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Not when I see you coming.
That's right. That's right. Oh gosh, here she comes with the clock test. No more clock test. Then in doing some research, there were a couple of other ones too. There was this GP Cog, General Practitioner Assessment of Cognition.
Never heard of it.
Right? There is the DSRS, Dementia Severity Rating Scale.
Sounds scary.
Yeah, I don't know if I like that one. There's the IQ code. That really is scary. Short Informant Questionnaire on Cognitive Decline in the Elderly. All that to be said, I think...
Wait, I want to throw some in there. The RUDIS.
Oh, what is that?
That one is designed to minimize the effects of different cultural learning and language barriers.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
And I could see that they would use that in other
and
areas in the state.
Yes, and it'll
country.
say things like, before you cross the street, how are you going to make sure you get across safely? So it uses someone's ability to assess their environment and make decisions before.
That's cool.
Yeah. And then there's the AD8, which is a different type of dementia screen. And then there's the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, which is like an IQ test for older adults, but it also shows dementia.
Wow.
I know.
And then we didn't even get into when someone is referred for a neuropsych evaluation. So these tools that we mentioned all take 20 minutes, 30 minutes at most, depending, right? If someone is really concerned about the level of capacity that someone has, you may have a physician refer someone to a neuropsych evaluation. Those evaluations, I feel like, take all different areas of any of these tests that we use and make it into a very broad, a very in-depth, not broad, but a very in-depth assessment. And that can run anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. It'd be cool for us one day to have, one of the neuropsych evaluators in the area come in and talk about it.
I'd be interested in that.
Right. Now, I don't know if I want to go through it.
No.
I'm not real sure what it's going to say about me, but you will see when someone is looking at, let's say somebody's, making horrible financial decisions, but doesn't have a power of attorney, and the family's really concerned and they feel like they've got to seek extra layers of help, maybe getting guardianship or conservatorship for their loved one. And the doctors recommend a neuropsych evaluation, or somebody's really struggling on doing, giving up driving and things like that. We're real fortunate in our area. And I think this is something that we need to make sure we have information wherever someone is that they can get to this, is there's a driving assessment. And this isn't like a AAA driving assessment or anything like that. This is actually cognitive based. There's a number of different layers, and It's cognitive, visual, field of view, your
Reaction
time. It's a number of different things, and you have to pass that beginning testing, which is all the things that we just talked about they do in the clinic. And if you pass those things, then you get behind the wheel. But what we've seen is typically by the time a physician is referring somebody to the driving assessment, they're already so concerned about their cognition that more than likely they're not going to pass that section. So there's a lot out there. So we just threw out so many different things. Mini-mentals, slums, fasts, MOCAs, clock tests, all of that to say, if you have questions when your loved one if you're concerned about your loved one with dementia, is seek out somebody with information. Because even though we talked about these, and we can talk about people that score an 8 or a 0 out of 30, we see people that come in and score 27, 26, but we learn more about what's going on, and maybe there's more deficits there that you need to recognize and support that person. Okay, you're not getting off. What's your story?
Okay, so one of my very, very favorite ones was when I was also doing administration. And I told you too this the other day. I had a lady walk by my office, which I had this big picture window in the office, and she was wrapped up in a sheet. She's this little tiny little thing with real short hair. And she comes sauntering by the window, and she peeks her head in, and she pulls back, and then she brings me a shoulder and pulls back. And she comes by the window, and at this point, I'm very intrigued. I'm very curious. So I open the door, and I'm like, "Hey, Peggy, what's going on?" She goes, "You want to know what I have on under this?" I was like, "Not particularly, but let's go to your room and find out." So I get her into her bedroom, and she has no clothes on, and she's covered in feces. And I cannot find a caregiver, and I cannot find any gloves. Finally, I find one glove, and I put it on my right hand because I'm right-handed. And
we get what you got to do.
We get in there, and I get her all wet, and then I realize that the hand that I need, because her shower head was on the right side, and I'm holding so it won't be hitting down on her face. I'm holding the shower head with my right hand, and I need to help her clean with my left hand.
No. What did you do?
You can't take off a wet glove and put it back on.
No.
So I just washed my hands really well when I was finished. But I just love the idea of, do you want to know what I have on under this?
And she was so proud.
She was so proud.
She was so proud.
Yes.
I know, that reminds me of another Miss Billy story. So Miss Billy, and somehow it'd always be me she would want to help her with spa day. So I would be in there helping her with spa day, getting her all clean. So I felt like we had a good bond. Like, she liked me, I always drew her name out of the hat, all those things. So one day I was in my office, very similar to what you were just describing. And, I had a bunch of windows in my office out to the hallway. And Gail, our activities coordinator, was walking with Miss Billy. She was taking Miss Billy to an activity. And Miss Billy, she was a strong lady. I mean, she was country bred, like she, tough as nails, that kind of thing. But, we would bond over spa day. But this day, and this is before I knew TIPA's positive approach to care. This day, she's walking by, and I'm just waving at her.
And she has no clue who you are.
Hey, Miss Billy. Hey, I'm doing all this. And she turns and says something to Gail, and then Gail starts dying out laughing, and they walk on, and Miss Billy kind of looks back at me with this like just disgust look, and then again they're walking on, and so later on I'm like, Gail, what happened there? What I was just so happy to see Miss Billy, and she said, Christy, she goes, when you started waving, she looked at me and said, what is that bitch waving at? That's our explicit word for the day.
Alan's down at the end of the table,
making sure we have an E on this podcast today. But remember, this is Aging
Uncensored.
That's right.
Yes.
Anyway, we can tell lots of funny stories. And there are even ones where I was doing assessment for a lady, and bless her husband's heart, he had done everything he knew possible and just was really struggling with her. And she had, in the moment, was having a severe urinary tract infection, and she wanted no business of somebody being in there. And I remember doing the assessment, and I'm sitting there talking to the husband, and I recognized there was no way I was going to be doing any of these tools on her, or, screens on her. I just needed to talk to the husband. And I'm trying to talk in code, because you're usually trying to talk in code. You want to be fair to the person that's sitting there and things like that. And you don't want to highlight all their deficits in front of them.
And you don't want to exclude them from the conversation.
And you don't want to exclude them from the conversation. And I tried to include her in the conversation, but she was not having it, because when I did try to include her in the conversation, she looked at me from across the room and went, "Yeah, out of here." I'm like, "Ma'am, you out of here." I'm like, "Excuse me?" She goes, "You get out of here. I want you gone."
Did you get up and leave?
I did.
Good for you.
I did. "Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am."
Mm-hmm.
But you never know.
You never know.
And again, I was in her home, and that's one of the things when we're working with folks and we go into their home, we can't go in with our agenda. We can't go in thinking that we've got to check off all of these tasks and we've got to do all these things. We have to build their trust.
Right. And you can ask questions, if you're doing the slums or something. "Oh, I need to write down. Can you tell me what day it is?"
Yep.
And if that person can't tell you, then you've done part of your screen.
That's
and
right.
You've done it in a nice way.
Absolutely. And by the time we weave in a cognition screen when we're seeing somebody, I will even sometimes go, "Oh my gosh, all right, I'm now at the part where I've got to ask all these silly questions. I'm so sorry about them, but will you give me just a few minutes to ask these questions?" And if they get them wrong, I'm like, "Oh, great job. Very good job. Let's just keep going on." You can tell early on,
right,
if it's going to be a difficult one. And then you can kind of tell where somebody's kind of middle of the road, and the way that they excuse not answering the question is they'll say something like, "Oh, that's a stupid question. I don't like these questions. These are dumb." Usually that means,
back
this
off.
is my defense mechanism. I don't know the answer. And so what I'm going to tell you is that this is stupid.
Yeah. I'm going to deflect.
I'm going to deflect. A lot of deflection. So I think we're going to kind of wrap up with this, because we could really jump into so many more things, but this is kind of continuing on with an alphabet soup, even though this is a new series, or just a new episode, excuse me, not a new series. But this is just the surface of what it looks like when you start the journey with your loved one with dementia. Expect that the physician, a practitioner, someone in healthcare is going to do some form of cognition screen.
And you can't practice for it, as someone mentioned that they would try to do.
That's right.
Because you never know which one they're going to pull out, and they could change
the words.
Yeah. So you can remember Tiger, Hope, Lily all you want, but then if I throw Apple, Table, Penny at you, then there you go.
That's right.
But can I tell one more story?
Absolutely. Please
Okay.
tell one more story.
So I have I had a lovely gentleman who was a retired physician, and he could not remember who I was, but he knew that he liked me because we would go to doctor's appointments, we would go to the hospital, we would go wherever together. And one day someone walked in the door. He was in the hospital this time. And I think it was either the nurse or the doctor asked, "And who is this person with you?" And he sat there for a moment and he goes, "My best friend."
Oh.
I was like, oh, that was the best title I've ever gotten.
I
Other
love
than,
it.
"You bitch."
That's right. That's right. I know I'll end on one more story in the hospital. So I had a beautiful, beautiful client. You remember this one. She was Greek, and she was also a beauty queen. At the time, she was like Miss Alabama's oldest, or the Alabama's oldest Miss Alabama. She was beautiful, wonderful lady, and very low pain threshold, even like, taking her blood pressure. Well, we're in the hospital, as we had been several different times, and even taking her blood pressure would cause her anxiety. And when she had anxiety, she would revert back to her Greek origin, and she would speak in Greek. And I knew the words that she was saying. I can't remember them right now, but she basically would be cussing out the nurses in Greek. And so I would sit there and hold her hand, and when they would come in, I'd say, "It's okay. She's just calling you nice names right now, but she, just realize that she has a low pay threshold. You just have to kind of walk her through this. It'll be okay." But she would be, you could hear her 3 bays over in the emergency room. But that's where knowing your loved one and understanding what their trigger points are for anxiety, or more importantly, how to comfort them in those moments, that's where it's so important to have that person's advocate with them.
That's what I was just going to say, making sure that there's someone there explaining things to them, but also explaining things to the staff.
Right. Because the emergency room personnel are amazing, but they have to treat so many different people that they are not in the moment going to think about, how do I approach this person with dementia? And I may not even know that they have dementia unless there's somebody there saying they have dementia, right? So anyway, I hope you liked this overview of dementia assessments. We spoke about one depression assessment, but dementia assessments. There's so many different things out there. And again, we know enough to be dangerous, and we know the ones that we use a lot, but we'll have experts on that can dive into even more of these things. Continue to follow our journey as we become Alabama's leading dementia care expert.
Yay!
We're so excited. But if you like this, hit us a like,
subscribe, share with your friends,
share, follow. I guess that's the same as subscribe. So do all those things. We're on Spotify. We're now on Apple. We are on YouTube. Is there anything else that we're not on? Okay, I think we're on all of them. I just got a like. So that being said, thank you so much for tuning in to Aging Uncensored, where you will learn all kinds of fun facts, things that you may not know about, things you may not want to know about, like the sultry lady and what was underneath her robe. Or how to bathe somebody who doesn't want to get into a shower.
With one glove.
With one glove.
Choose wisely.
That's right. That to be said, make sure there's gloves in all rooms. But thank you for tuning in. And until next time, Christy Baines and
Nicole Crawford.
Thank you.